Welcome back to part 2 of the Lexus build. In this episode, we're talking about the turbo setup and how it's going to work. Rear mount turbos. Everything you need to know. There's not a great deal of space in there for a turbo, and the ones I have seen, they either take the battery out and put the turbo in there, or in front of the engine between the radiator is the other place. Probably more common that place. So here's the exhaust path to the battery mounted one, and the same for the between the radiator and engine setup. And I'm sticking with that one for a minute. The common way I've seen this one done is by coming out the manifolds at the back, coming down, back forward to the front of the car, and then up into the turbo that way. The downside of that is you've got to come at like a 100-degree back on yourself, then into a 90-degree, and then another 90-degree to go up into the turbo. And as long as that setup is, for about another 20 centimetres, you can have it at the back. No 90 degrees, just straight through. So what's the pros and cons of this? Well, this speaks for itself. You're about 35 kilos at the back of the car instead of extra on the front end. Again, massive heat reduction in the engine bay can only be a massive benefit. And with a cooler running turbo, because of the reduced exhaust temperatures, you're going to get a reduced intake temperature. You don't get to lose your aircon, you don't get to lose your power steering. Everything looks pretty stock and you can remove it quite easily. The cons, yeah, it's going to be a little tiny bit laggier. Can't help that. And you've got to find some way of getting oil to the turbo and back again. And in my case, I'm going to lose quite a bit of boot space. And throttle response, yeah, that's going to be a bit lower as well, because you're coming from the back of the car, and lower heat and pulse reduction from the exhaust. That is going to drop the efficiency of the turbo. So what do you need? So we need to keep the gases moving as quickly as possible and keep as much heat in there as possible. So we're going to use standard size piping, no cats, no resonators, no sharp bends, and plenty of heat wrapping to keep as much heat in there as possible, and then a flexi just to counteract the engine movement. And this turbo is one of those cheap Chinese turbos. It's a GT 3582 copy, good for about 500 horsepower, so they say. We'll see how good this performs. All pretty standard hardware mounting stuff. Just the external wastegate there. The turbo has got an internal wastegate, but I'm not going to use that because it's about 12 psi or something crazy. I don't want that much boost. Not just yet anyway. And now we're going to talk about the biggest factor in this, the lubrication system. Now I'm going to get oil to and from the turbo. You can see here, this is an engine sump from one of the Fiats, using its own oil pump, and that's going to be driven by this, the most reliable motor you can get, a wiper motor. There's a speed controller on that mounted at the front, so I can control the speed and thus the pressure. I've got this kind of working-ish at the minute, but it needs a bit more refinement yet. And this is it in its most basic form when I was first sort of mounting it in the car. It's also built-in oil temperature, oil pressure monitoring, and I can even monitor the boost at the turbo from here as well. Now straight out the turbo, we're going to go into this Y pipe with a electronic cutout, and it's going to go straight out the turbo, through there, straight to a tailpipe. That's it, no silencers, nothing. And out the other side, it's going to go through a series of silencers, so it's nice and quiet when I want it. And that'll be coming out the tailpipe at the other side. Now the charge pipe work quite narrow diameter, it's about 2 inches I think it is. We're going to get that from out the turbo to the front of the car. And that's why I can't have the thing too low, because it's got to pass underneath the front cross member. I think I'm going to use a bit of flattened alloy piping for that, and then bring it up towards the inlet. And fueling wise, I'm going to go for the 255 Walbro, brand new stock fuel filter, a rising rate fuel pressure regulator. Got this LD Performance wideband kit, some extra bosses and some more piping, and there's an EGT sensor. I'm not really sure where I'm going to mount that yet. And this should keep us covered while we're using the standard ECU and only running very low boost. And now on to trying to sort that throttle response problem out when you've got a turbo at the back. And that's by using this. Now this is from a Volvo Penta Marine engine with a diesel, but it uses turbocharging and supercharging. This thing is so simple. It's just a little box with a flap inside, intake there, and boost in there. When it's on intake and vacuum, the flap is one way, so it's just sucking straight through, no problem. And then when you get some boost, the boost goes in on the right hand side in this picture, and that just closes the flap, and in goes your boost. A simple solution to a difficult problem. Instant throttle response, back again. A load of gauges for oil temperature, oil pressure, EGT and boost, really. Pretty simple setup. Just keeping an eye on everything. So when you've got 4 car projects to support, you know, you've got to be working on a budget. And this boosting project, it really is on a budget. I mean, practically everything's come from eBay. And I'm in at about £1,500, about $1,900. So, yeah, that's quite a lot, really. But that does include the Phase 2 parts as well. And that's this, a 91 early big rod from a Toyota Sora. Now, obviously, I wanted the big rod engine so that I could put a bit more boost through it later on, when I've got some decent management. And this being a 91 engine means that it doesn't need cats on it for the UK market. And now to sort out that filthy engine bay. It's far from perfect, but it'll do for now. Looks a lot better. But next time, I'm going to drop the rear subframe off, sort those upper arm bushes, and see what a 98 subframe and diff fits like in a 97, see if it'll connect up to the prop shaft okay.